The most powerful thing you can do when someone disrespects you, doubts you, or walks away from you is nothing. Not because you are weak, not because you have nothing to say, but because you have finally understood something most people never will. That silence is not emptiness, it is density, and disappearing is not retreat. It is the rarest form of strength. Section 1. The problem most people face. Most people spend their lives explaining themselves. They justify their decisions to people who are never going to understand them. They chase the approval of those who never truly offered it. They defend their character to people whose opinions were never worth having in the first place. Look honestly at your life. How much of your energy, real, finite, irreplaceable energy, has gone into trying to make someone believe in your worth? A promotion you didn't get, a friendship that grew cold, a relationship where you became smaller just to keep the peace. How many times have you found yourself sending that second message, offering that unrequested explanation, waiting for validation that never came? This is not a personal failure. It is a deeply human trap, but it is a trap nonetheless. And the first step out of it begins with one quiet, difficult question. Why do we keep chasing? Section 2. Why most people react instead of think. Here is what happens inside the mind when someone ignores you, criticizes you, or challenges your sense of self. Your brain registers it as a threat, not a philosophical inconvenience, a threat, as real to your nervous system as physical danger. And when the mind perceives threat, it wants resolution, immediately. So you speak when silence would serve you better. You explain when your actions already spoke clearly. You go back when walking forward was the wiser path. Pause for a moment. This is not weakness of character. It is the architecture of the unexamined mind. A mind that has never been trained to sit with discomfort, to let tension exist without immediately collapsing it. The ancient Stoics called this the space between stimulus and response, that thin, sacred gap where wisdom lives. Most people never find it. They move from feeling to reaction without ever passing through thought. And in doing so, they hand their power away every single time. Section 3. The Stoic Insight. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome and one of history's most disciplined minds, wrote something in his private journal that he never intended for the world to read. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He was not writing this as a performance. He was reminding himself, a man with absolute power over millions, that the only domain he truly governed was the one inside his own skull. Think about this. If the most powerful man in the ancient world needed to remind himself not to react, not to chase, not to explain, what does that say about the rest of us? Stoicism is not a philosophy of cold detachment. It is a philosophy of radical self-possession. It asks you to look at the chaos around you and choose consciously, deliberately, how much of it you allow to enter you. And the answer, according to every Stoic who ever lived, is far less than you currently do. Section 4. The Psychological Trap. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life mapping the depths of the human psyche, identified something he called the persona, the mask we wear to manage how others perceive us. The danger, Jung warned, is when we begin to believe we are the mask. When our internal peace becomes entirely dependent on the reflection we see in other people's eyes. This is the trap, and it is more common than almost any other psychological pattern there is. When someone withdraws their approval, the person caught in this trap does not ask, "What do I actually think of myself?" They ask, "How do I get their approval back?" And so they chase, they explain, they diminish, they negotiate with people who should have had no power over them in the first place. Imagine this situation. You are extraordinarily good at what you do. But one person, one voice in a room full of noise, doubts you. And instead of continuing your work, you stop. You turn around. You spend the next week trying to convince that one person. Meanwhile, everything you were building waits. This is what the trap costs. Not just your dignity, your time, your direction, your life. Section 5. The Mindset Shift. The shift is not about becoming cold. It is not about becoming indifferent to people or numb to connection. It is about understanding the difference between those who deserve your energy and those who simply demand it. Epictetus, a man who was born into slavery and rose to become one of the most influential philosophers in history, taught this with complete clarity. He said that some things are within our control and some things are not. And the moment we stop fighting that distinction, the moment we truly accept it, everything changes. You cannot control whether someone understands you. You cannot control whether they stay, whether they believe in you, whether they choose to see your value. Those things exist outside the boundary of your will. What exists inside that boundary is how you spend your attention, what you build in the hours they spend doubting you, who you become in the silence they mistake for defeat. If this way of thinking resonates with you, consider subscribing. This channel exists for people who are serious about building that kind of inner architecture, one idea at a time. Section 6. Real life, real cost. Consider the workplace. Someone takes credit for your work. The instinct is to announce it, to correct the record loudly, to make sure everyone in the room knows the truth. But what does the person with real lasting power do? They continue producing work so undeniably excellent that the question of credit becomes irrelevant over time. They do not shrink to fight a small battle. They expand to make it obsolete. Or consider social pressure, the slow erosion that happens when the people around you are comfortable with a version of you that is smaller than who you actually are. When your growth makes them uncomfortable. When your silence, your discipline, your changes are read as arrogance or coldness. The temptation is to explain yourself, to make your transformation palatable to people who benefited from your limitations, to keep shrinking back into the shape they recognized. But here is what the Stoic understands that most do not. You owe no one an explanation for becoming more. The people who are meant to understand your evolution will recognize it without a speech. The ones who need a speech would not believe it anyway. Section 7. The Deeper Philosophy. Seneca wrote in one of his letters, "Retire into yourself as much as you can." He was not advising isolation. He was advising interiority, the cultivation of an inner life so rich, so grounded, so full, that external noise simply has less room to land. Socrates, who was condemned to death by a city that misunderstood him, never once begged for approval. He asked questions instead. He turned every attack into an inquiry, and in doing so, he did not just defend himself, he outlived every one of his accusers by 2,500 years. Aristotle spoke of eudaimonia, a Greek word often translated as happiness, but more accurately meaning the full flourishing of your potential. He believed this was not something others gave you. It was something you grew. through the daily exercise of virtue and reason, regardless of whether anyone was watching. These men understood something that the modern world, with all its noise and performance and visibility, seems to have forgotten. Depth is quiet, power is patient, and the most enduring version of any human being is the one built in private. Section 8. Questions for the honest mind. Let me ask you something directly. Who are you when no one is watching? Not performing, not explaining, not positioning yourself, just existing. Is that person someone you respect? Is that person moving towards something or endlessly managing how they appear? How much of what you do each day is genuinely yours? And how much of it is a response to what you think others expect? And here is the deepest question of all. If no one ever validated your path, not your family, not your peers, not the world, would you still walk it? Because the answer to that question tells you more about where you actually are than anything else ever could. Section 9. The long game. Here is what nobody tells you about the person who stops chasing, stops explaining, and simply disappears into their own becoming. They become magnetic, not because they performed mystery, but because they developed substance. And substance, real, cultivated, hard-won substance, is one of the rarest things in a world full of performance. The person who no longer needs your approval is, paradoxically, the one you most want to impress. The person who does not explain themselves leaves a silence that others fill with respect. The person who simply keeps working quietly, without announcement, eventually becomes impossible to ignore. This is not strategy. It is the natural consequence of redirecting your energy from the opinions of others into the quality of your own life. Time does not lie, and eventually, the life you built in silence speaks louder than any explanation you ever could have given. So let this be the thing you carry with you after this video ends. You do not need to be understood to be valuable. You do not need to be seen to be real. You do not need to convince anyone of what you already know about yourself. The Stoics did not pursue greatness to be celebrated. They pursued it because anything less was a waste of the one life they were given. And they understood, with the kind of clarity that only comes from genuine introspection, that the only permanent audience for your life is you. Stop chasing. Stop explaining. Go quiet. Go deep. Go inward. And when you emerge, and you will, it will not be as someone who fought for recognition. It will be as someone who no longer needed it. That is not emptiness. That is freedom.